think our energies are agitated and we're inspired, and so wanted to lead folks into a chant. When women's rights are under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
What do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
What do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you again for inviting us to share. I think this is a really important time right now to kind of exchange like what's going on around the world and how it's impacting us, especially as we live here in the United States. So again, I'm sharing here about Gabriela, New York. We are a U.S. chapter based from the chapter of Gabriela, Philippines. A lot of folks are pretty familiar, but I just wanted to highlight that we're a mass-based Filipino organization living both here in the States and in the Philippines. And we also recognize that we want to eliminate imperialism. Especially, we also recognize that because the Philippines is so dependent on its land, that it wants to eliminate feudalism as well as bureaucrat capitalism. Oh, okay. And this just is an example of several of our chapters, not all. I do want to give a shout out that our newest chapter, Gabriela, Oakland, just launched this weekend. So Washington, D.C., San Francisco, Los Angeles, Portland, New York, Seattle, New Jersey, and Oakland. Oh yes, and LA, yes. So I'd like to share tonight about what Gabriela, New York is doing locally, as well as the political situation in the Philippines under Duterte and martial law, especially since it's been extended, and also introduce the U.S. Duterte's 3 wars, and as well as what we as a community can do to rise, resist, and unite. Some of our local campaigns here are that we do New York rights trainings, that we advocate for violence against women. It's really important for us. We have a campaign that we do normally in November to end violence against women, as well as there's a picture here from a demonstration that we did when NBC had tried to put a television show that was mimicking the life of a woman who was trafficked as a mail order bride to raise 2 people, and it was going to be a comedy. And we did not stand for that. So both on the West Coast and the East Coast, we went to NBC studios and we said, we can't stand for that. And we made sure that it didn't air, that the pilots were not even able to air. As well as some protests that we did in front of the Philippine consulate for traffic teachers from the Philippines. And that specific case, majority of our Gabriela DC chapter have teachers that came out of that traffic case. So I guess to set the tone, a lot of people have heard about Duterte, and that Duterte as well as Trump both have fascist characteristics. And right now this map is showing all the human rights violations, whether it's an extrajudicial killing, a massacre, a forced evacuation, and the spark is aerial bombings or aerial strikes. And this is the whole of the Philippines, and this particular area right there that's zoomed out here is Mindanao. I went to Mindanao in November 2017, and I had also went 3 years prior in 2014. But for this specific trip, I was right around here where Lake Lanao is, and I was able to travel from pretty much here to here, and was doing a lot of work meeting the community around the lake. And particularly this right here is where Marawi City, which is the area that was pretty much bombed and is no longer livable, and families cannot go back. So that was the area. To also show this infographic, this is only from July 2016 to November 2017. That's a lot of numbers, but I also want to add a few more. That in Mindanao specifically, that there are 29 extrajudicial killings, that there were 335,686 in Mindanao, that there were 23 frustrated killings and 58 illegal arrests in Mindanao. But I'm sure that the number is going up. Also, I wanted to highlight that even in December, we were able to count the numerous lives that were lost, whether it being a priest, that communities were being starved, the indigenous communities of the Lumad in the Philippines, and the many other different communities that were affected. And these are some of the communities that were impacted. So again, to highlight two out of the many extrajudicial killings that happened, specifically I wanted to share about, even church groups are being targeted and taken. We had a visitor, the Bishop Ruel from the United Church of Christ in the Philippines, which is where I actually stayed and visited to visit indigenous communities that were also evacuated onto their land, and so they'd been staying there as well. And so the church had opened their grounds to take in that community. But he was as well targeted. And I also wanted to highlight this student, this Lumad indigenous student, only 19 years old. When I went to the Bakwit school, that was also an evacuation for the Lumads, they were still conducting classes, but they weren't able to go back to their classrooms, but they did have this particular painting that was highlighting one of the students from their school. And this here are myself, Fiju, both from Gabriela, New York, as well as two other Gabrielas from Gabriela, Portland. I also want to highlight political prisoners under Duterte right now. They've been living under miserable and disheartening conditions. Specifically, this is Amy Pond, who was a teacher at one of the networks from the indigenous schools called SOS, Save Our Schools, who was a teacher there and was imprisoned arrested in August 19th, but I do have good news. She was released just last year, December 11th. But also like her, I had visited several schools, this one being the Miss Fee Academy. It stands for Mindanao Interfaith Services Foundation, Inc. And this was in Bangas, Southern Cotabato. This is one of the new schools that are opening up. But particularly about this school that was interesting to me was that I had seen several of these schools. One school was really large. It was more out in the public by the road. But because this school was a lot further in, it was receiving a lot of harassment. So there was only about 15 students and 2 teachers able to conduct class, and that they were not able to complete their school yet. Also wanted to show you that political prisoners affect people of all ages. Someone who's really important to me as far as Gabriela is Sharon Capasao, who was also a political prisoner. The Expo Gabrielas that went in 2015, they visited her in the prisons, and when I got to visit, she was released. So it was really wonderful to meet her outside of the prison, and I had met her. I had even got to have one-on-one with her, and she was really powerful because I know that Gabriela has been waging a campaign called Free Our Sisters, Free Ourselves, and she's definitely one of the people whose struggle I was really drawn to, and to see her come out on the other side was really impactful for me. I just wanted to share this quote that she had here. It says, and this was published, she helped co-write this on the International Day to End Violence Against Women on November 25th. It says, we celebrate this day as we ourselves prepare for another dictatorship threatening to swoop down on our people, a dictatorship that defies all universally accepted standards of human rights and democratic rule. It is a dictatorship that flaunts its wants and disrespects women, and it is by this bloodthirstiness and misogynism that promotes the exacerbation of human rights violations against its women. Therefore, we demand to stop the abuses, to end tyranny, and to end violence against women. And so this was the 1 Billion Rising action for, and and violence against women right outside of the Department of Education. Because currently, the Lumad students aren't able to conduct classes because they're not back in their classroom, or they're at evacuations, and so the Department of Education has made it very challenging for the Lumad to continue conducting classes because they have a difficulty keeping up their permits because they've been pushed back on their permits. And there's Sharon right there next to me. So I wanted to share again, the aggression comes on all sides, and so these three wars are called Oplan Tokang, which is the war on drugs, and a lot of folks have seen, Duterte, I think the number I recall before, it's now like over 14,000 people have been killed on the so-called war on drugs. And this is affecting all people. I think we had an action in Queens that highlighted, a 17-year-old boy who was killed, and we even could hear in his testimony, he said, I have classes tomorrow, can you please not do this? And was still, they did not care. And when we were doing that action in Queens, even our migrant workers, our migrant community, Migrant in New York, expressed that their family members have seen the direct impacts of what the war on drugs has impacted directly their families by their relatives also getting arrested for trumped up charges on so-called war on drugs. Also the Oplan Kapayapan, which is the war on the revolution movement, as well as human rights defenders. And so I'm going to show you a few more examples of that, but it's really been amplified that trumped up charges for anything and everything, that's basically why folks are going to jail. And then again, this last point was made very clear when I went to Mindanao and went as close as I could to Marawi City, was the war on the Moro people. Their land and their community has been displaced, all for the sake of saying they're looking for ISIS or rebels for the Maute group, and it's really the civilians that are most impacted. It's directly the people's homes, and that, especially where the Lake Lanao is, it's right, it's established where that's where they go to the water and things like that, and so now they've been pushed out further, and it's really difficult for the Moro people to start their lives back, but they really want to go back. I think that's one thing that I remember them sharing with me, was that regardless if their homes are in rubble, they're asking to return. As I said about the war on it was the war on the human rights defenders. As I said, I came to the Philippines right as Trump was there for the very first time doing the ASEAN Summit, which is an economic conference that supposedly is there to help the Philippine economy, but who does it serve? Who are they negotiating with? What are these trades about? It was definitely not about the people. And so there's been a crackdown on legal activists, both in the Philippines and even while we were there. I just wanted to share that there was an article the day after we were here. They stated the Philippine Department of Interior and Local Government announced that they were targeting foreigners who had participated in the protests, and they had been identified, and they were still trying to figure out how they wanted to follow up. So I was still there, and I was really concerned with my exit, and so of course our collective was make sure that lawyers were on hand, both in the Philippines when I left, and especially Bayan USA was waiting for me at 4 a.m. to get out into the airport. But they're ready to target even our legal organizations. That activists and community leaders should not fear for their well-being simply for acting on the right to protest and demand a world without fascism and imperialism. I also wanted to share about the peace talks that Duterte has discontinued the peace talks, that his administration is engaged in the peace talks in hopes that the revolutionary forces would lay down their arms. But they need to really address the root causes of why the armed conflict is there to begin with, right? Sure. And that even with this, there's an order that says you have the right, especially under martial law, to shoot to kill any suspects, anyone suspected as an NPA, the New People's Army members. But suspects, so there's no right to due process, so, that's where these trumped up charges come from, because you could say anything and that'll be the excuse for someone that dies. And then they also ordered the arrest for the National Democratic Front consultants, who were also part of that dialogue. It's a very formal dialogue, which, the peace talks really advocate for the social and economic justice, especially looking at genuine land reform and, really trying to industrialize and have access to jobs and foods for the Philippine country. So this is, I forget what day is this. Do you remember what day this is?
D10. D10.
Oh, the International Human Rights Day, and for the Philippine Consulate. And we were fortunate to have this awesome projection. But it was really important for us to be clear to call Duterte out and say that he's really moving towards a dictatorship. And so, martial law is admitted now, even when they say that they've controlled ISIS, that martial law has been extended for another year, if not more, and that he's claiming this fake revolutionary government, which initially was used to campaign the elimination of drugs, so the war on drugs and corruption. But again, he used this term against those that were his destabilizers and to plot the oust against him. But that day was really important for us because we wanted to call it out as it is, and we do see him. This also is becoming a full-fledged dictatorship. The approach to that is really killing the freedom of press, right? So this is a quote from the New York Times. It says, "The actions against Rappler is only the tip of Duterte's assault on the media critics. His supporters have also made the Philippines a swamp of fake news, conspiracy theories, and online harassments." And this is because there are online trolls, there are malicious bloggers, Mocha, who helped put Duterte in power, and who right now, Mocha is now the Assistant Secretary of the President Communications Operational Office. And Rappler was a really great resource because it was accessible. It was in English, and it's really great media. But now that it's pretty much there's been a ruling that there's threats of this legitimate media or this website be shut down. So the role of the United States. Yes. That's Trump and Duterte. Basically, Duterte has not done anything to dismantle the relationship between the United States and the Philippines. It's been there for a while with the visiting forces agreements, which allow the U.S. troops to come to the Philippines and come out to do as they please, even though the bases have been closed for a very long time. The Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement has been continued. That U.S. military has announced that it's building its own facilities inside the Armed Forces of the Philippines camps. That there are 257 U.S. and Armed Forces of the Philippines joint exercises. And that the U.S. troops allow the Philippine military facilities to train Philippine troops on counterinsurgency acts. I just wanted to share too that this has been cited that the U.S. government gave the Philippines $9 million for Duterte's bloody war on drugs and $47.5 million as military aid in 2017. And so this year, they're allocating about $111 million as military assistance to the Philippines, primarily for the implementation of counterinsurgency, while only $7 million was given to the anti-illegal drug campaign in the Philippines. Something to consider. I also wanted to highlight this. Like I said, the church sector has been really open about wanting to advocate for human rights of the indigenous peoples, and so they opened their land. This is on UCCP Church, where the Lumad community is staying at, and so I was part of the International Solidarity Mission, And this is, it says stops the fascist attacks. And so we do currently have a campaign called Stop the Killings. If you'd want to sign on or learn about it, it's basically a call to ask to stop military aid, right? And really just to build solidarity on pushing for, the peace talks to continue. And that's something we really want to advocate and ask the public at large to support. So again, I want to highlight that, repression breeds resistance. And, women fighting, up here is the women fighting in the legal urban mass movement. This is Gabriela, Philippines. But we also recognize that that there are women in the New People's Army, the real revolutionary government that is already in 71 out of 81 provinces in the Philippines. So just to be clear, there are different variations of struggle and understanding that there are legal mass organizations, but because imperialism is violent, we must understand and use methods to defeat this violence. And so the revolutionary government is really strong in the Philippines. And if you want to catch up, they're actually on social media. So you can look on Instagram, it's prwc.official, and on Twitter, prwc_info. So what can we do? I'm really glad that I got to share with you just a little bit about my visit, but I'm going to be having a longer in-depth sharing on January 28th, which is going to be Rise and Resist Tyranny, Women United for Liberation, which that is just along with this topic. So it's going to be a report back more based on the different places that we went and what was currently happening in each of those communities. There's also going to be a film screening that I'm really excited and so fortunate that I got approved that I can share that was also highlighting a lot of the same communities and organizations that I had met. So I really want to share those stories and share them all to you. As well as we're doing a fundraiser because we're sending another batch of folks to go to the Philippines next month. So again, if you would like to learn more, again, save the date. It's in Midtown from 4 to 7 p.m. on Sunday, January 28th, I'm sorry. And so another ask or task or invitation is if you're really interested in this struggle, as you can see, our issues are very similar to Honduras issues as many other countries, and so it's really important to ask for international solidarity. So you're more than welcome to join. If you join the ILPS or the ICHIRP, which is the International Coalition for Human Rights of the Philippines. If you join any of those organizations, they also are sending contingents out to the Philippines probably like twice a year. So. And as a community, we are really trying to be resourceful. That's why we're holding a fundraiser and whatnot, so that you can also go as well. And then as far as tangible ways that you can support Marawi, there's a petition that's going around that the National Alliance for Filipino Concerns has put out, so that you can stand with Marawi and ask for martial law to be lifted, so that these folks can return to their homes. And then we're also on social media too, so if you want to stay in touch with us, please check us out on all the things. Oh, I also wanted to share that we have a benefit that's coming up next month for Philippine Solidarity Week, which is kicking off on February 4th. There's going to be a benefit concert on February 11th. So if you get in touch with us soon, we'll release more information then. But yeah, I think that's it. If I could also close out with a chant, I'd like to teach you a chant. It's called Abante Babae, which is advance women, Palaban Militante, move forward militantly. So, Abante Babae!
Palabante, babae.
Palaban Militante!
Palaban, militante.
Abante Babae!
Palabante, babae.
Palaban Militante!
Palaban, militante.
That was great. Thank you.